Hi. History can be a pretty complicated thing to talk about. As much information as we have about the past, it still doesn't fully fill in all of the gaps in terms of what happened and why. Today's episode is going to get into some pretty touchy subjects, so first and foremost, I want to apologize to anyone viewing if you think I'm leaving out key pieces of information regarding certain topics. It is not my intent to misrepresent or belittle any group. If you've watched my channel so far, you know that I purely want to talk about lesser talked about films and why specifically they deserve that recognition. So with that being said, let's talk about Everything Is Illuminated.
Starting out as a novel published in 2002 by Jonathan Safran Foer, Everything Is Illuminated hit the silver screen in 2005. It was directed by Liev Schreiber, who was most known for his roles in the Scream franchise, X-Men Origins Wolverine, and Ray Donovan. But he's been acting since as far back as 1994, and he's tried his hand at screenplay writing and directing. He worked on the screenplay with Foer, and the two had a lot of material to work with, both what was known to them creatively and historically, but also personally. Both have Jewish ancestry, and though footage of them speaking about the production is very, very scarce, I can only imagine they relied on their family history as much as anything else. The main trio of the film consists of Elijah Wood, who needs no sort of introduction or explanation, but still deserves praise for his performance. We also have Eugene Hutz, a writer, musician, and actor who's worked with Madonna, lent his talents to the Hotel Transylvania 3 soundtrack, and has his own successful band, whose name I'm not going to attempt to pronounce because I will absolutely butcher it, but we'll flash it on screen, don't even worry about it. Last but not least, we have Boris Lyoskin. Most Americans, like myself, will only really recognize him as the cook from Men in Black.
Sex is up! Good as Ivan. Gave him a break.
But he's been acting in Europe since the mid-50s, and he absolutely knocks this performance out of the park. The film focuses on the collector, Jonathan Foer, who collects trinkets and items representing his family members and lineage. He's heading to the Ukraine looking for a woman named Augustine, who helped save his grandfather's life during the 1942 massacre of the Jewish members of the Trachtenbrod village and nearby areas. Now, this massacre really took place, leaving more than 5,000 dead and barely 200 escaping. Many of the survivors that did escape the event went on to join the Soviet resistance, but sadly, none of the survivors would be able to return home, as the village was completely destroyed by the end of 1942. Located not far from the Sobibor extermination camp, it was one of the unfortunate towns caught up not only in World War II as a whole, but specifically Operation Barbarossa, which was a Nazi military campaign aimed at devouring the majority of the Soviet Union. And while not entirely within the scope of this video, I do want to take a moment to direct you to Potential History, a personal favorite channel of mine who has a really fascinating 4-part series on the operation and goes in depth on what was happening on both sides of the fight. I'll have a link in the description. Since Jonathan isn't from the area and the geography has changed since the event, he enlists the help of a local guide to show him the way. Enter Alex, Boris, and their...
How about a seeing eye, bitch?
Sammy Davis Jr. Now, Boris is someone of significance that we really do have to dive into, but Alex is arguably the comedic and emotional heart of the film. He's a hilarious and lighthearted character, despite dealing with a verbally abusive grandfather and a physically abusive father. While Alex is shown to look down on Jewish people at times and does casually refer to African Americans as the colonial N-word, it's abundantly clear that his comments and views are really just a product of the bigoted home that he was born and raised into. But throughout the film, he quickly realizes that the world is larger and more complicated than his father and grandfather have told him. Jonathan sheds some light on lighter topics throughout the film, but one of the biggest revelations he brings to Alex is during the first dinner, when Jonathan recounts how his grandmother, a young Jewish woman living in the Ukraine at the time, felt incredibly persecuted already and thought,
when the Nazis invaded, she actually thought it would be an improvement.
He also seems genuinely shocked to find out that women and homosexuals can openly have whatever jobs they want in America. We're even shown that he's risking turning into his father when he straight scolds Jonathan when he joins in on a conversation when he asked him not to. But later that night at the campfire, he shakes that cold impulse and opens up to Jonathan about what he thinks is going on with his grandfather. When Lisa tells him the story of what happened, he comes to realize just how wrong he was about things. And the next morning, when Jonathan gives him his grandfather's Star of David, Alex fights the hesitation and gladly accepts the gift. Finally, it's Alex who provides the opening and closing narration. The story opens with him saying,
I was of the opinion that the past is past, and like all that is not now, it should remain buried along the side of our memories.
Obviously, his use of the word was is indicative that at the time of retelling the story, he's clearly changed his mind. That's best expressed by how he ends the film.
I have reflected many times upon our rigid search. It has shown me that everything is illuminated in the light of the past. It is always along the side of us, on the inside, looking out. Like you say, inside out. Jonathan, in this way, I will always be along the side of your life, and you will always be along the side of mine.
Boris is quickly hinted to know more than he lets on, not just in him pretending to be blind, but also when he instantly changes his mind about taking the American on a tour once he hears where the American is looking to go to. Multiple times throughout the trip, he drops hints that he knows what happened to the village, from knowing the area to letting slip that he understands the Jewish language. And side note, I say Jewish language broadly because I don't honestly know whether they were using Hebrew or Yiddish, and as I said, production interviews about this movie are incredibly scarce, so again, my apologies. Now, with the disdain for the Jews that he's shown to have, you do wonder if he took part in any of the atrocities that occurred there or in the greater area. But it's only towards the end of the film you realize that he was one of the Jews who was caught up in the events that took place there. Not only that, but he survived a firing squad and managed to get away after they dumped him with the rest of the bodies. When he climbs out of the pile, he removes his jacket with the Star of David and walks away. It's a mix of disgust with himself for what the Nazis made him and the others do to their Torah, and a desire to bury and forget the horrible, horrible thing that he just survived. And knowing this, while not making his earlier actions and comments excusable, it certainly makes them understandable. A person who lived through such a tragedy would never come out of that mentally sound, and it's led to a lifetime of self-hatred and regret. In his conversation with Lista, he's confronted with his past all over again, seeing as she was the one who saw him escape the pile of bodies all those years ago, and must know full well what he's been struggling with all this time. And sadly, it culminates in Boris taking his own life after they leave Lista's house. But as Alex comments,
in this moment, he seemed as if for the first time in his life, contented to be where he was.
Boris was finally able to put his demons to bed and find a sense of peace after all these decades. And it's very touching that his family, including the abusive father, gives him a Jewish burial next to the Trachtenbrod Memorial site. Additionally, I do find it interesting that the story starts with Jonathan losing his grandfather and ends with Alex losing his. It's just another thing that really brings the two together in the end. This film speaks volumes without saying very much. When it needs to, it gives you just enough historical or emotional divulgences, but for the most part, the film is very content to give you the bare minimum and leave you to observe and appreciate the beautiful Eastern European landscape while sitting and chewing on what little the characters have said. Once the characters get their jokes and awkward conversations out of the way, the film dials in on the fact that an entire community and group of people were wiped out for no other reason than simply being seen as lesser. Countless families were torn apart amidst the Nazi occupation and the war that Hitler's party brought upon the world. This is merely a small personal look into how the lives and deaths of those who came before make all the difference in who we are now. So, with most of the important bits out of the way, I wanted to end this episode on one final small thought. In the first episode of my channel, I mentioned that Sam Mendes, who directed 1917, inspired me to start doing my own writing. But in watching the interview with Jonathan Foer, I realized that he more closely words how I felt about starting this channel.
Nothing to say.
Yeah, it's true. I'm never sure what it is. I never thought that I had anything to say. It's not as if I felt I felt sometimes like I was imagine I was a stereo system. It's not that there was a particular song that I wanted to play. It's that I wanted to test the speakers and have volume coming out of them. So in my effort to make the book, I never thought of it as a story that I had to tell. I thought of it more as an activity that I had to do.
I think that mindset is a perfect encapsulation of the fear or hesitation of trying something new. But not just that, it perfectly sums up who we are as a people. Each of us has our own trinkets, our own ways of remembering the past and people who were important to us, and in learning more about their past, we in turn discover more about ourselves and our place in things. And giving into that intangible, primal need to express ourselves simply for the sake of expressing ourselves can really lead to some beautiful things. So if there's anything that we can take away from this film, it's the hard reminder to not only remember and respect the past, but also how you feel right now in this moment. But I'm curious, what do you think?